Welcome in. It is Big Ten Today on a Thursday. We are presented by Gatorade. Dave Revson and Jake Butt. Home game for you this weekend. You get the Ohio State-Northwestern game at Wrigley. That should be a great scene.
What I'm most curious about, of course, the game, but I've been to a few games in the suites, and they got the dessert truck that comes around. So I'm wondering if we're going to get the dessert truck up in the booth. I'll let you know. I'll fill you in next week.
I feel like we might be able to make that happen for you. Yeah. So that would offset, like you lose airline miles, you lose hotel points. But holy cow, the dessert tray is worth it.
Have you seen the dessert tray?
I have seen the dessert tray. It's
unbelievable. It's worth all that and then more. I told Chip Kelly, too, we were in our coach meetings. I was like, Coach, just keep your head on a swivel if the dessert truck's going around. And I asked him to get a brownie and some ice cream for me or something. Ice cream would melt. Get a brownie or a cookie for me, and I'll come down and say hey to him after the game.
There you go. Let's get into our big story, and the Buckeyes are very much a part of that. It is the CFP bracket. Bucks toward the top. Ohio State, one of 4 Big Ten teams in the top 5. It's the first time that any conference has ever pulled that off. Oregon's number 1. They would project to get the Big Ten's bye. The Bucks are second, but remember, only one top 4 seed from each conference. So they would be the 5 seed. Penn State, Indiana, they would host home games as well. Jake, none of this happens in a vacuum, so this is almost a bit of a fool's errand. But I would just say, I look at that and I say, if each of these teams loses only once and no more than once, it feels to me like they all have a pretty good chance of getting in.
I agree with you. And the only concern I have is I look at the rankings this week, and Indiana was able to move up, and I think that's a positive on some levels. But I look at the logic that got them there, and that's the part that's concerning, because last week Tennessee was ranked ahead of Indiana and BYU. So what happens this weekend? BYU wins, almost lost, right? Indiana won a close one, a nail-biter with Michigan. And Tennessee blows out and cruises to a win. So you'd think there really wouldn't be any change in rankings, and yet there was. BYU and Indiana jumped over Tennessee, and what I'm saying is, what's the consistency there? What's the logic of the committee to make that happen? That's the part that makes me a little bit uneasy about getting 4 teams in, is the committee's almost, to make that happen, it almost looks like it was an eye test decision.
Well, if you were to think about the 2 teams that people complained the most about in terms of being underranked in that first college football playoff rankings, I think it was BYU and Indiana.
Yes.
So it's possible that they just revisited it and said, okay, you win, I get it. But I understand what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is there's a fluidity to it. And this has always been the case. I mean, going back to the very first year when Ohio State snuck in, right? And you had the 2 teams ahead of them that both won. And it's kind of like, all right, well, what happened here?
Yeah.
Well, this is the way that it works.
I think you're exactly right. I believe the committee's probably reading some headlines, or they're aware of the narrative surrounding the rankings in the first edition, and they likely overcorrected. But again, that wasn't because of a result on the field this weekend. Michigan is by no means a worthy conference champ opponent this year. They're an average team. BYU beats Utah. It's an average team this year. And Tennessee wins by multiple scores. So if it was just off the play on the field this weekend, you wouldn't expect to see that movement. But I do believe the committee read and is aware of the storylines, which, again, that concerns me, because there's not a defined system that makes this predictable.
Right, and part of that, I mean, look, I've advocated for a long time for computerizing this, but computerizing it in a very sophisticated way, and coming up with you get 12, 15, 20 people who love football and think they know football in a room. You say, how are the ways that you evaluate offensive line play? You figure out a way to quantify that. How do you evaluate defensive line play? You figure out a way to quantify that. The issue isn't computers. The issue is the inputs.
Yeah.
The issue is what you put into the computers. And I feel like you could have a better system. This is the system we have. That's something for down the road, perhaps. I do want to talk about some of these Big Ten teams. And I was thinking this morning, I don't feel like we have talked about Oregon as much as maybe we should. And I think part of the reason is there hasn't been a whole lot of drama. I feel like we talked about them more in the first couple weeks when they were dropping from 3 to 9, when they had the close games against Idaho and Boise State. And then they got their footing against Oregon State, and they have been really good since, and they've largely been drama-free. And I think, rightly or wrongly, often drama makes for the more interesting conversations. But man, they are really good.
And they got a quarterback that could be the Heisman winner this year in Dylan Gabriel. I completely agree. And you know, when we called the game last weekend, I asked Dan Lanning about that. Like, do you consider this? Does it matter to you? You know, Dan doesn't care about any of this, right? He said, who cares when they were ranked number 1 the first time around? They are quiet. And maybe the positive to that, though, Dave, is they understand it doesn't matter. You know, if Oregon continues to win, they really control their own destiny. They'll stay that number 1 seed throughout. But I think what was interesting for me to watch Oregon is, as I was thinking about the history and the national perception of the Ducks, I believe there's a national perception that this is a finesse team, right? You think of the Chip Kelly days. I know this is a while ago. A team that won by putting up points and they could, you know, outscore you. But under Dan Lanning and in recent years, this is a complete football team. They're dominant on both sides of the football. They made some corrections in the trenches. I think that's the most underrated defensive line in the entire conference. I mean, Jordan Birch, we saw him toss Terez Davis from Maryland. And what's been encouraging and maybe why they're quiet is, you're right, if there's drama, we're going to talk about it. We've been waiting for some drama to happen. But they just continue to roll. Trap game versus Purdue, they roll. Maybe the trap game's Illinois, they roll. They beat Michigan. And then Maryland, that was a C to C plus game by Oregon standards. Like, they played sloppy, way too many penalties, dropped passes. Of course, it's their first game without Tez Johnson, Marcus Harper, their starting guard. And they still won comfortably. Like, that's, to me, those are the points that confirm this is the best team in college football. Every team has slipped up at this point. Oregon is the only one that has avoided that loss.
It is fascinating to see the evolution of the program, and we talked about this with Kenyon Barner. We had him on a week ago today, I believe, or maybe a week ago tomorrow, and we were talking about Oregon and the way that they have evolved, particularly at the line of scrimmage, and become less of a finesse team and more of a team that can finesse you but also can overwhelm you.
They can do it all
with strength and power, and they are just such a complete team. You were talking, they control their own destiny. Indiana controls its own destiny.
Yeah.
Ohio State, I was asking Harold Shelton, our researcher, a little bit about this. To a large extent, they do, unless Oregon were to lose. And then if you've got this pile of one-loss teams, then all of a sudden you have to go to the tiebreakers, and tiebreakers are a little tough to predict. But were Ohio State to win with victories that win out, with victories obviously over Indiana and Penn State, they'd win the tiebreakers for them. If Oregon wins out, then Ohio State goes. How do you evaluate where Ohio State is at number 2?
You're splitting hairs between Oregon and Ohio State, and they lose by 1 on the road in an electric environment. What would happen if that was a neutral field, or what would happen in Columbus, right? I think if those two teams played, they'd split 10 games because they're both equally outstanding. What I'm excited about for Ohio State is this is a team that is a veteran team with all their best players, are their best leaders, are guys that decided to put the NFL on the back burner and come back for this exact moment in time. I look at guys like Travion Henderson, Emeka Egbuka, JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, guys that were absolutely are NFL-type talents, but came back to compete for a conference title and a national title. And their linebacker, Sonny Styles, I was listening to one of his podcasts last week. He was talking about the Buckeyes know what it feels like to win and win and win and then lose the games down the stretch. And I think that pain is going to allow them to propel themselves to higher heights this year. They're a team, after the Oregon game, a little sloppy versus Nebraska, right? Penn State, a little sloppy, especially early in the game. But the way they finished that game, the goal line stand, and then to finish the game with the ball in their hands, and then to go and dominate the following week against Purdue. This is a team that's starting to peak at the most important time of the season.
It does feel that way. Man, they did not play well against Nebraska. And It felt like it was a perfect setup to come out and annihilate someone.
Yes. After Indiana annihilated Nebraska, right?
Right. And just kind of show, hey, you'd be ticked off. You're coming off of the Oregon game. You've had some time to ruminate. And when they came out and did not play well in that game, I wondered about them a little bit. I've wondered less here in the subsequent weeks. I do want to talk to you about Indiana and just kind of the mentality of the Hoosiers here. I don't think it is a stretch to say it's the biggest game in the history of Indiana football. It certainly is in my lifetime. Again, they went to the Rose Bowl in the late 60s, so, who knows, there's someone who knows.
Yeah.
I don't know about what those games were down the stretch, but for all intents and purposes, this is the biggest game. I mean, you think about the spotlight, you think about everything on the line here. I think the Hoosiers can lose this game and still be in. I think them moving up this week told us that the committee holds them in high esteem. You pointed out the fluidity, and I think the fluidity makes me wonder a little bit. I certainly think they have to come out and play well.
Yes, I think we're all in agreement of that. And really, this season's been like a movie. It's like cinema, how it's all led up into this point, going back to the comments at the end of December by Kurt Signetti, calling out the three final teams he plays.
In succession.
It's cinema. And the big storyline for Indiana is the schedule. But they've dominated their opponents. I understand the game against Michigan. I look at that in a positive light because they showed they were able to win in a manner we hadn't seen them. That was a physical game. I mean, that is one of those games where you're going to be ice tubbing for 2 or 3 days after the fact. And here's where the cinema comes into play. They have a bye week. They have a chance to get healthy and get fresh ahead of that Buckeye game, a chance to scheme and watch film. This is a team that's extremely capable. They got one of, if not the best quarterbacks in the conference in Curtis Rourke. And the belief in that program is almost inspiring, the way they take the field and effectively just refused to let themselves doubt a single second of what their process and capabilities are.
I agree. I think that's been the coolest part of it is we always hear the phrase, act like you've been there before. And I know the JMU guys had a lot of success, but it is different. It is different to be in the spotlight in the Big Ten versus in the spotlight in the Group of Five. It's just different. And we'd be fooling ourselves. I know it means as much to those people, but it just, they're bigger stories. You have more people talking about you, have more outlets that want to get a piece of you. It's just different. And they have been impervious to it, Jake.
Even a game like, again, Michigan this is not the same Michigan team as last year, but that's still a brand. And Indiana would always play us tough back in my days. This is a program that would always play, even they play Ohio State tough and just come up short. But they lose, and they just come up short. So part of this is overcoming like the history and the brand and the perception. And for them to win that game, again, each week they're just planting seeds of belief. In every win is they're watering those seeds, leading to the culmination of this season against an Ohio State team. Many people think Ohio State's going to win that game. There's no reason why Indiana can't win that game. They've been so impressive. I think the defense doesn't get enough credit. I mean, that was a defensively won game. Special teams showed up. They've done it in all 3 phases, and that speaks to the coaching job Signetti's done.
I agree with you. They are a complete team. I'm so excited to see that game. You never want to wish a week away.
Yeah.
I'm excited about this weekend. All Big Ten football games excite me. It's just kind of the way that I'm wired. But, man, that's going to be something else. It's going to be something else next weekend. Look at the big board. 7 games in all this weekend in the Big Ten, starting with that West Coast battle coming up tomorrow night. 3 of the Big Ten's 4 playoff hopefuls are in action. Number 1, Oregon going to Madison. 2nd-ranked Ohio State, we already talked about it, battling Northwestern at Wrigley Field. And 4th-ranked Penn State will be at Purdue. Indiana has that bye before the huge showdown with the Buckeyes next week. We mentioned just 3 weeks left in the regular season. Jake, we talked about the playoff teams. They are certainly very interesting, but there are lots of other interesting storylines and teams down the stretch. So give me a few. Where would you start team-wise?
Start with USC, and we'll get to Nebraska in a second because that's a very interesting matchup in and of itself. But USC, they're at an inflection point, and Lincoln Riley's at an inflection point. You know, momentum and perception matters in college football. That helps your recruiting. That helps you raise funds. And Lincoln Riley did such a great job building momentum for himself and building perception. Even back when his first year with Caleb Williams, like this program was red hot, and you're thinking the sky is the limit. What a slam dunk hire. They're trending in this direction right now. And this season has been extremely disappointing. It used to be, you know, when I signed to go to Michigan, it was a commitment for 4 years. There was never really a thought. It never crossed my mind that wouldn't be the case. That's the world of college football now. There's player mobility. So the momentum and perception doesn't help you recruit where USC should be the go-to school in a state that's littered with talent in California. You also have to recruit your own roster as well. This has been a frustrating and a disappointing season for the Trojans. And now you bench Miller Moss and bring in Jaden Maeva. Now it's on you, Lincoln. Like now the quarterbacks are changed. Now it's on you as a head coach. You change your defensive coordinator. The finish of this season is critically important for him.
I think you need to know what you have at quarterback. Like, I understand why he made that move. He knows what he has with Miller Moss, and now you have to see, what do you have with Maava? You've got Julian Lewis, who's committed, but you never know until guys sign in this day and age. He is a highly thought-of quarterback as well. I feel like you have to know what you have here. I think it's fair to point out 5 losses by 19 points. I mean, they've been in all these games. They've led in the fourth quarter in all these games. But it's also USC football. And close isn't good enough at USC football. They have too much of a tradition. They have too much in terms of the accolades they've accumulated throughout the years. This is not a program that takes solace in being close. And so you have to figure out a way to win games. I think you need to know whether Maava is the guy. It's not just on Miller Moss, right?
Yes.
That offensive line hasn't been great.
Yes.
But let's see what you got. Who else team-wise?
Illinois is quietly has an amazing opportunity here. They're coming off a bye week with 6 wins. And I look at their schedule. All 3 of their remaining games are winnable. All 3 of them are losable too, right? That's the competitive part of the conference. But for Brett Bielema, what an amazing opportunity. He's telling the message to his team in this bye week is zooming out a bit and saying, guys, look at what we've done to get here. 6 wins, chance to get to 9 wins. That'd be a big bowl game they get into. A chance to get to 10 wins. Kind of fitting that theme of momentum and perception. Altmaier is going to come back next year. Like that's a lot of positive momentum for Coach Bielema. And I think what's normally a strength, which is the trench play, the offensive line, the defensive line, it hasn't been to the standard we'd expect of Brett Bielema. But he's got the momentum and made the strides in all the other areas. So the chance to finish this season strong, that's exciting. Obviously, 10 wins, you celebrate it, but for the future as well.
They only won 10 games 4 times, and one of those was 1902.
I mean, that's unbelievable.
Were playing a ton of games.
Yeah.
So, it would be an amazing accomplishment for Illinois to get to 10 wins. You mentioned that you wanted to talk about Nebraska as well. What are you watching with the Huskers, who, man, they have got to figure out a way to make a bowl?
I can't believe. How are we here?
I don't know.
How are we here?
I don't know.
They start 5-1, and their one loss even was like a gut-wrenching loss to Illinois. I mean, Raiola misses a throw, the special teams. And now you've lost 3 straight. What? Okay, so you make a change at the offensive coordinator. Like they're honestly similar to USC in the sense that they're an inflection point. We talked so much about year 2 of Matt Rule, and the expectations were sky high, and then the season starts the way it does. And now in context, we know that Colorado win was really impressive. That's a good Colorado team.
Can they retroactively count it as a ranked win, by the way?
That's how I operate, you know. But progress isn't linear. So they stop the bleeding. In comes Matt Rule, 5-1 to start the year, and now they're going down. The question is this going to continue? And that's why this game is so important. Or does the change at offensive coordinator, and hopefully Raiola's healthy and able to play, and hopefully they can get the run game going to help him out a little bit, then they can finish strong. I just think about the different worlds we will be in terms of our perception and belief of Matt Rule in Nebraska based on how this season ends.
I agree with you. I think they're the most interesting of those non-playoff teams. They have got to figure out a way to win a bowl. Matt Rule said to me at Media Days, I kind of prefaced it by saying, well, you never put absolutes on anything. He said, no, we have to make a bowl.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it would be disappointing.
Yeah.
So they've lost 7 straight over the last 2 years.
That fan base is
when they had an
starved
opportunity.
for it. They're starved for it.
Okay, how about some players? Give me a few players. Where would you start there?
Obviously, we talk about the quarterback of the number 1 team in the country, Dylan Gabriel, a chance to win the Heisman. And really why I'm interested is because of the injuries. He had built a special relationship with his wide receiver 1, Tez Johnson. He's going to be out. We don't know how long. And they got weapons. They got weapons on the outside as well. Evan Stewart and some of their tight ends. But for Dylan Gabriel, this team is going to go where he goes. This is a system with Coach Stein, which puts a lot on his shoulders. He has to process a lot. Each play call has the chance to go 3 or 4 or 5 different ways. What these next few weeks are about for Oregon, it's not just solidifying themselves as the number 1 seed. They have a chance to really separate, and that's going to fall on the back of the shoulders of Dylan Gabriel. And how cool would it be for him to win the Heisman as well?
It'd be amazing. Now, he's 3rd right now in the athletic straw poll. He is a distant 3rd, frankly, right? It's Travis Hunter, Ashton Genty. There's a big gap. And then him.
Quarterbacks control your destiny a little more than those guys.
Right? And it's after championship weekend, right? Like, let's say, hypothetically, he has a big game in the Big Ten championship against one of these marquee teams and they win it, I don't think it's a stretch to think that he could end up being your Heisman winner. Where are you going after him?
Yeah, first off, I'd love to see Travis Hunter win the Heisman, but as an opponent, I can decide not to throw him the ball, right? So that's something to remember here. Next would be Jeremiah Smith, Ohio State's wide receiver. And what more can be said about him that hasn't already been said? He's unbelievable. But I look at him and some of the catches he's made, even look at this catch right here. The body control on that is so rare for a guy that's only a freshman. Like, that reminds me of Marvin Harrison Jr. But I think he does things even that Marvin didn't do, particularly at that age. I look at him as, Dave, I thought if Jeremiah could go to the NFL after this year, I think he'd be a top 10 or top 15 pick. I think he's that good. I know I talked to our producer, Pavlos, about this. Could he be a first-team All-American? What he's doing, rewriting the record books in Columbus and the impact he has on the game has been nothing short of amazing. I'm excited to see how he finishes because really you have a guy that's a true freshman that would be a starting wide receiver on every NFL team. That's what Chip Kelly told us before the Western Michigan game. He's like, yeah, this isn't just an NFL wide receiver. Chip said he would start. Right now, he would be a starting wide receiver on every NFL team. That's insane. What more could you say? Talking about a teenager, and he makes it look so easy, which, just speaks to how special he is.
He really is. He has been so much fun to watch this year, unless you're trying to cover him. I'm guessing that's probably not a whole lot of fun at all. It was for UCLA's Carson Schwesinger, logged his first 2 career interceptions in the Bruins win over Iowa, was named Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week. He's a semifinalist for the Butkus Award, given to the nation's top linebacker, and the Burlsworth Trophy, given to the nation's best former walk-on. He is the Big Ten leader in tackles per game. And Carson Schwesinger joins us now for our big interview. Carson, pretty amazing accomplishments this year, particularly for a guy who had 27 tackles in his career coming into this season. What were your expectations for yourself entering this year?
I think entering this year, I just knew whatever opportunity I got, I was going to make sure that when I was on the field, I was given 100%, and I think that's all I came into this year with. And been given some great opportunities and tried to make the most of them.
Well, you certainly have done that, and the team has started to make the most of its opportunities, too, after getting off to a really slow start with a very difficult schedule. You guys have won 3 in a row. To what do you attribute the turnaround in your season?
I think it really can just be attributed to the team and the coaching staff. And like you said, maybe a difficult start there, but there were pieces that we all saw and we believed in, and we knew that if we put all the pieces together, we could start doing what we thought we were going to be able to do. And so really just staying together and still having that belief in ourselves, I think, has gotten us to where we're at.
What was the message from the coaches when you were 1-5?
The message, you hear it's been the same every week. It's just we got to clean up small things, and even with the wins, there's still things to clean up. So just making sure we come out of those, learn from the games, and come out better than the week before.
I mentioned off the top you're a walk-on. You have really a great story. You're from Southern California, not all that far from UCLA. You started playing football, I understand, at age 5, when the age requirement to get into the league you were playing in with your brother, who's older than you, was 6. Your dad forged some of the facts a little bit. Is there a statute of limitations there? Are you afraid the authorities are going to catch up with you?
I don't think they probably have too many issues with fudging some of that for some flag football, but that was definitely some fun to be able to play with my brother.
What do you remember about those early days of playing football and what you liked about it?
I just remember, football being fun, and I think that's the thing that, is important to keep even as you play at higher levels is at the end of the day, you're playing it because it's fun.
Take us to high school. Really good player. You're a safety. You're a receiver. One of the better players in the area, and yet there just isn't a ton of recruiting momentum. Fill people in on kind of what it was like junior and senior year when you basically have crickets.
Yeah, obviously maybe it's not what I wanted to have happen, but obviously at the time too there was some bigger issues going on. I know COVID was happening, right. So kind of the world was a little shut down in terms of recruiting, so it wasn't the same that it is now or it was before. So I was just, trying to search for any opportunity I could get. I just wanted my foot in the door somewhere, and ended up being able to get that.
Yeah. How did the UCLA opportunity come up?
Honestly, it was just through my head coach in high school having some connections, not too much of anything else versus just somebody saying that they'd be willing to give me a chance here and just taking that opportunity.
Where would you have gone had the UCLA walk-on opportunity not come up?
To be completely honest, I probably either would have tried to go walk on somewhere else, but UCLA was one of the schools I knew I'd wanted to go to, so I might have ended up just going to UCLA and maybe not playing football if that hadn't come up.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about that possibility, that maybe there's some other guys walking around the campus who could be the next Carson Schwesinger, right? If given the opportunity. You were given the opportunity. What were you promised when you came to UCLA? What did the coaches say in terms of what your role would be or what the opportunities might be?
I think there wasn't much, just kind of that I'd be on the team and there'd be opportunities. I think that is all I came into it hoping, was just at some point being given a chance. And since I've been here, always felt like part of the team, which is something that's been great about this program.
I always think that walk-ons kind of need to do something exceptional to get themselves noticed, whether it's in practice or the weight room or just manifesting some sort of leadership, whatever it might be, to get coaches to see them differently. Because I think there's a lot of predisposition when someone comes in and you're kind of labeled as a walk-on. What do you think that thing was? Was there something that you did that you feel like got you noticed and got the coaches to say, hey, maybe Carson can be more than we anticipated?
I think it's not just, one thing here or there. I think even with any player on the team, what gets you noticed is being able to go in day in and day out and be the same type of guy. Try and work as hard as you can, be one of the hardest workers out there, and it's more being able to do things like that every day versus one thing here, one thing there. That's really going to propel you forward.
So the one thing was that you were good. Do you remember the moment where Chip Kelly announced that you were on scholarship? Tell us about that moment.
Yeah, so that moment ended up being my second fall camp. So I'd been there for about a year, and had a pretty good fall camp. And he had brought it was me and 5 other guys up to the front in front of the team on the field after a walkthrough at night, and he basically said, these guys all have scholarships, and then the team starts going crazy. For me, it was a little surreal. Kind of don't remember too much because it happened pretty quickly, but definitely a great moment.
What was that phone call home like?
Oh, it was great. I remember I called both my parents. They weren't together at the they were just like, my dad was at my mom's or my little brother's practice, and my mom was just still at home. So I called them separately, but both of their reactions were pretty cool to hear. Very, very surreal at the time. So yeah, it was a great moment for those phone calls too.
That's super cool. Kaika Malloy, who's the defensive coordinator, I thought had a great observation about you. He said, even now that you're having this great season and now that you're one of the best players in the Big Ten, that you still approach every day as if you're starting from ground zero, as if you have something to prove every single day. Where does that mentality come from? Is that something that's self-motivated? Is it something you learned from someone? Where did you become that person?
I think that's something that I've always had with me. I think it comes from just how I was raised with my parents. My dad always instilled in me that the one thing you're going to be able to control is how hard you work and how hard you play, and just kind of taking that throughout life. In any aspect of life is being able to work hard is what's going to end up making you successful.
Carson, I don't want to let you go without talking about academics, because you are a bioengineering major, which sounds very easy, first of all. I'm guessing that is the intersection of biology and engineering, though it's kind of above my head a little bit. But describe for people in layman's terms what kinds of problems a bioengineer approaches and tries to solve.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of, I enjoy it personally because it's got a really wide range of application. It could be anywhere from gene editing, which it may not be my forte, but there's also parts of, implantable technology in the body or wearable electronics and things like that I find interesting, and maybe in the future could end up even intersecting with sports at some point. Yeah.
All right, that's pretty amazing stuff, and it is quite commendable to do that and to be a football player as well. You got a lot on your plate. What you got on your plate this week is a game against Washington tomorrow. This is a team that I certainly don't need to tell you can really throw it around. They have an excellent back in Jonah Coleman as well. What are the biggest challenges that the Huskies present for defense?
Yeah, like you said, they're able to throw the ball. They're able to run the ball. They're able to come out and there's not just one single facet that they're good at. So obviously, as a defense coming in, you got to make sure to have everything handled, and then just being able to go out there and still execute what we want to do.
Well, looking forward to seeing that game coming up tomorrow night, and really appreciate your time. Really happy for you. This is a great story. This is the kind of story that I think makes college football so special. Congratulations on all your success, and we'll watch for you down the road. Thanks, Carson.
Thank you.
Our Gatorade game leaders, we take a look at Joel Klatt's top 10. You will notice a couple of differences from the committee. He has Indiana higher than Penn State, Hoosiers 4th, Nittany Lions 6th. Also has Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia higher up than where the committee does. And undefeated BYU is not in his top 10.
And pleased to be joined now by Fox Sports lead game analyst Joel Klatt. Joel, it's always fun to talk to you at this time of the week because we've seen those Tuesday college football playoff rankings. Last week, you had some disagreements with the committee. You and I agreed that we thought that Indiana had been underrated by the committee. What do you think of what they did with the Hoosiers this week?
Yeah, it was quite an adjustment, wasn't it?
It was.
I mean, for really them and BYU, Rev, and we had argued, at least I had, that I thought that there was some brand bias in the first edition of the college football playoff rankings. That was corrected, it seems like. And what's fascinating to me is that I believe it was corrected based on outside sentiment rather than on-field play. And the reason I feel that way is because both BYU and Indiana probably played their worst games of the year last week, and BYU narrowly defeating Utah in a really emotionally charged game in Salt Lake. And then Indiana, kind of escaping Michigan with a win, and that's a Michigan team that has obviously struggled this year. And yet the committee still moved them up. So now you're sitting there, and last week I thought that Indiana was in a precarious spot whether they would get in with a loss. And I thought that they would be a bubble team even with one loss. Now I feel differently about that. As long as the committee stays consistent based on the way that they rank teams this week, I think that Indiana as an 11-1 would be probably safely in the playoff based on where they're starting right now. And obviously if they win out, then they would have a chance to win the Big Ten and get in automatically.
I'm with you. I think they created a buffer zone for them, which is great. I think they need to be competitive with Ohio State. Clearly, you don't have to win the game. If you win the game, you're in an incredible position.
Exactly.
And then you just need to take care of business against Purdue, and then it feels like they'd be in the college football playoff. Speaking of Purdue, you saw them against Ohio State. Again, it's not the greatest competition last week. It's been a rough year for the Boilers. But what did you learn about the Buckeyes? I mean, every time you see a team in person, I'm guessing you see something a little bit different or a little new. Was there something that stood out there?
Yes. I mean, always with them. And one of the things that I notice with them is that they are more adept and I should say adaptable this year. And I think that's because Ryan is not calling plays. In the past, they kind of were what they were on both sides of the ball the entire year. And this year, I have seen them change and adapt. And based on the way that the season has gone, I think that the offense looks a little different now than it did prior to the Oregon game. The defense looks a little bit different now than it did after the Oregon game. And because of that, I'm just reminded that Ryan made the decision to step away from play calling duties so he could be a true CEO. So what's fascinating for me, because Rev, how many years have I been doing this? 10 years with Gus now, 8 years in the Big Ten. And we've covered a lot of Ohio State,
Yes.
a lot of Ohio State. And this is the first time that I noticed that during the course, in particular late in the season, I'm seeing these adjustments from them from a schematic standpoint, from a philosophical standpoint on both sides of the ball. And to me, that's a little bit different this year.
Is there one, particularly on the offensive side, that a layman would understand?
Yeah.
That isn't too complex X and O wise?
Yes, and great question. I'm going to say it's a philosophy of experience, and that philosophy entered the fray when they put Carson Schwesinger in at left guard, even though he had not played left guard, and they moved Donovan Jackson out to left tackle. So because of the Josh Simmons injury at left tackle, they were struggling on that side of the offensive line. They tried Zen Michalski, he gets banged up, and now they're going to play Penn State, and they've got a guy in Austin Sareveld who has played a lot of guard and even started 2 games early in the year for Donovan Jackson at left guard. So it would have been very easy for Ryan Day and that team to just start Austin Sareveld and say, well, he's been playing there, because that's what a normal, thought process and philosophy would be. And yet, Ryan, because he's not involved in the play calling duties, can rise above that, and he can look at it from I think, a 30,000-foot view and say, what do we really need? And what we really need is experience, in particular in Happy Valley, and to face some of the teams that we're going to see down the line. Carson Schwesinger has started an entire year at center. So now I get a guy that has started an entire year, and I can put him in between my 2 most trustworthy offensive linemen, Donovan Jackson, who's moving out, and Seth McLaughlin, who's the center. That, to me, is a change that I think is unique this year because of the seat that Ryan has and the way that he can kind of analyze this team versus being in the minutia of calling the plays.
Interesting. We're going to see the Buckeyes, of course, this week here on the Big Ten Network. They'll be at Wrigley Field against Northwestern. Assuming they get through that game unscathed, we're going to talk a ton about Indiana and Ohio State, obviously, next week. But just kind of big picture, are there a couple things that stand out as you anticipate what will be a big noon matchup and will be one of the biggest games of the year?
Yeah, well, first of all, I can't wait for that matchup. And what the first thing that I think about is that I think that the superpower for Indiana so far, at least offensively, has been the back shoulder fade. And I know that that's a very specific deal, but nobody throws it better than them. We've talked about it all year long, and it's not that they can just hit you down the field and over the top. It's the fact that when they get the one-on-one, they are so good at the timing and ball placement of that back shoulder fade that they feel like they can beat any one-on-one situation. And that's the one area I think when I watch Ohio State, I would try to attack their defense. I would try to attack their corners. And that's what I think Indiana is going to do. So that matchup stands out to me. I can't wait to see that matchup. I can't wait to see how Ohio State wants to handle their offensive play calling. And specifically meaning, like, how much do you want to huddle and slow the game down and try to wear them down with a run game in order to just kind of grind them out, feeling like they're the more physical team, Ohio State would. So all of those things come to mind, and it's certainly a matchup that I can't wait for. Plus, let's face it, and I deemed this on my podcast, I said this is like the Signetti triangle of suck. He named all these teams in that basketball arena. He said Michigan, Ohio State, and Purdue, and he's got a chance this month to get them all. So this is Signetti's time right now.
Hey, you've got Utah, Colorado on Big Noon this week. I know that one is important to you, first of all, because it's the game you're calling, but also given your history at Colorado. And I'm interested in your perspective on this because the shows that debate this type of thing have been having a field day on this one. So you come at it from a perspective of understanding Colorado and understanding its history, its recent history, and its longer-term history. Which is the better story this year, Colorado or Indiana?
Oh, man. I think that they're equally first of all, those two coaches, I believe, are the only two coaches that I'm considering, and maybe there's others, and I'm being short-sighted. Curt Cignetti and Deion Sanders should be the top 2 candidates for Coach of the Year. I think we would all agree on that. So to try to say which is a better story is really difficult. I think in the first year with Indiana, the way that this has gone, the JMU infusion from Curt Cignetti and his players at Indiana, it's a remarkable story in particular because they don't have a history of success. And by the way, their history of in football isn't even close to Colorado's history. Remember, Colorado has Thorpe Award winners, and they've got Butkus winners, and a Heisman Trophy winner, and a national championship. And this was a premier program from about 88 to 96. They won the Big 12 in 2001, played a lot of big games, obviously, in the early 2000s. Indiana didn't have that. So the scope of the story, I think, is bigger at Indiana, but because of who's doing it at Colorado and the level at which they were playing before he got there, both stories are really incredible in our sport.
They're both great stories, and it doesn't diminish one to say that, hey, I think this one's a better story. I think Indiana's a better story. Again, my bias is I've been in the Big Ten my whole life. I mean, my first Big Ten football game, I was 6 years old. I've been following the league ever since then.
And it's it's Indiana. He's doing this at Indiana.
There's 134 teams in major college football, Joel, and the team that's lost the most games of all those 134 is Indiana.
Yes.
So
trust me, I am with you. And what he's doing is remarkable. And by the way, the scene at each of those places, when you go to Folsom and you feel the energy from the fan base, and when you go and you're in Bloomington and you feel the energy, I love it. And by the way, how good is a 12-team playoff? Because now these teams are playing real football games that mean everything for the top end of the sport. I'm loving this year. I really am.
It should be great. Have a blast this weekend, and then we'll look forward to taking an even deeper dive next week into that Indiana-Ohio State game. Thanks, Joel.
You got it. See you, bud.
Saturday, number 2 Ohio State squares off with Northwestern at Wrigley Field. Coverage begins with Big Ten Tailgate live from Wrigley, 10 a.m. Eastern, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. We mentioned off the top of the show, Jake, you'll be calling that game. You get a chance to see Will Howard in action, one of the better quarterbacks of the Big Ten, but where does he fit in your top 5? We're about to find out. Let's count them down, 5-1. Where would you start?
We'll start with number 5. We'll start with Max Brosmer, and really, he's just been a phenomenal story. Almost no quarterback's been playing as well as he has in the past 4 weeks. You just look at his past 4 week stats. He has 8 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and averaging about 250 yards through the air. I looked at these and I felt good. 3 and 4 were a close pick. 1 and 2 were a close pick. For 5, I looked at Brosmer, I looked at Edwards, I looked at a few others. Why I chose Brosmer over Edwards, for example, the head-to-head, Brosmer just outplayed him. So he's been the key guy that's helped Minnesota kind of catch some fire here in the middle of the season.
And Edwards, to be fair, struggled a little bit recently, 8 turnovers the last 4 games. But Brosmer's been great. I mean, Minnesota is a pass-first team this year, which is not really P.J. Fleck's DNA, but I think it's a reflection of how good Brosmer is. You mentioned 4 and 3 are close to one another, so give us those 2.
Okay, so 4 is Aller, 3 is Will Howard. And the funny thing about this is, just to start with Drew Aller, in terms of a pro prospect, he's probably the best pro prospect of all these guys. He's just got that size. He's got a rocket launcher attached to his arm. The ball just jumps out of his hands. What hurts him and what limits him is he hasn't had an elite wide receiver 1. He hasn't had a guy that can solve problems down the field and make him right. It's really been his tight end, Tyler Warren. The biggest games, the difference between Aller and Will Howard, once again, the biggest games for Drew Aller this year, Illinois and Ohio State. Those 2 games, he's averaging just about 140 yards, 0 touchdowns, 1 interception. So that's why I give the nod to Will Howard. And to talk about Will Howard, he's been everything for the Buckeyes. I mean, that was a slam dunk get in the portal this offseason. I've seen some number comparisons between him and even Dylan Gabriel. I think the Buckeye fans thought maybe we could push him for a Heisman, get him into that Heisman-type conversation. He, inside of 20 yards, he's about as good as you can ask. The past four of his past 5 games, he's completing over 80% of his balls. And the real key for Will Howard and the strength is his ability to run. And we've seen Chip Kelly start to implement that, particularly in the low red zone. So also, he played a great game. You talk about the big games for Will Howard. Played a great game versus Penn State. Played a great game against Oregon. So in the biggest moments, Will Howard has elevated. That's the separation for me.
So clearly then we're talking about Dylan Gabriel and Curtis Rourke as the top 2 in some order. Yes. How did you decide to rank them?
You know your Big Ten quarterbacks
It's kind of my job.
Yes. You can make a case for either. And if you told me you thought Curtis Rourke was the best quarterback, I'd give it to you. But I have Curtis Rourke at 2, Dylan Gabriel at 1. Both of them have been extremely accurate this year. Both of them have led their offenses. I actually think the two offenses have similarities in terms of both these guys need to process well. Why I have Curtis Rourke slightly behind Dillon Gabriel is a few reasons. It's the running ability. Dillon Gabriel has shown to be a more than capable and dangerous runner in the big moments. 6 touchdowns on the year, including a key rushing touchdown late against the Buckeyes. It's also the health. Not Curtis Rourke's fault, right? He got hurt. He missed a little bit of time. And then the last thing is the schedule. Dillon Gabriel has had to do it against, the Buckeyes, for example, whereas we've talked about Indiana, the schedule hasn't been great. And, Michigan was able to find some success and slow down that red-hot Indiana offense.
Yeah, they've both been absolutely phenomenal. I mean, we're talking about Curtis Rourke, second in the nation in passing efficiency. Dillon Gabriel, as we know, just set an all-time record for touchdowns accounted for. You really are splitting hairs there. And this is one of those that'll be so fascinating to see how each one of them plays in pressure situations down the stretch.
Yeah, and I'm excited. We're going to see some matchups here. Obviously, we'll see Rourke versus Will Howard. That's going to be a fun matchup coming up next week. And then the winner of that game gets to duel it out with Dillon Gabriel in the Big Ten Championship. So we've talked for a while now, man, we need good quarterback play in the Big Ten Conference. We got it this year.
Yes,
the quarterback play has been elevated significantly.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it is far better, particularly at the top half of the league, than maybe we anticipated.
It's fun.
Coming into the year. We'll see you tomorrow. DiNardo and Wani join me. Have a great call at Wrigley this weekend.